What's happening, everybody? My name is Jeremy Lord, and welcome to part 4, the final part of our 4-part series on digital art and kind of everything around that. So we've gone through a few kind of different things in episodes 1, 2, and 3. Episode 1 was sketching. Episode 2 was inking up and kind of cleaning up the line work. And episode 3, last week's one, was all about kind of adding color. And that has led us to what you're kind of seeing on screen right now. So today we're going to put a little bit of shading and add some volume into this and some special effects. And we'll talk a little bit about kind of like finishing off the piece as well, getting it ready for like an actual application. In this case, we'll probably make a desktop background out of this image. Before we get into it, as always, there's a chat here. So we're streaming live. If you have any questions on anything, if anything's not clear, or you want to ask me who my favorite video game character is, or anything like that, don't hesitate to shoot a question in the chat. Always happy to talk and draw at the same time. And with that underway, let's get started on kind of adding some shading to this. So there's a couple of things around this. There's a bunch of different ways you could do shading in Photoshop. As always, it's not just kind of like one way is the way and everything else is wrong. Whatever way works for you, whatever way kind of works for the file setup that you've got is probably going to be the best thing to do. So we'll take a look at that in just a second. And we've already got a question from Flynn, actually. Who is my favorite video game character? Do you know what? I launched myself into that comment having no pre-prepared thing. And it's just kind of like one of those, like, what's your favorite movie kind of questions. So I'll have a think about that and maybe I'll get back to you. But yeah, I wasn't ready for my own question. But yeah, so let's get stuck into this. So we've got a bunch of layers in here. As you guys saw, like I tend to have a bunch of different layers kind of happening when I'm doing this. It can kind of change the way I'm going to do shading or not. So what I generally like to do with this is have all of that kind of grouped into a layer or a layer group, right? And I've called this cols, which is my kind of shorthand for colors. OTL is outlines. Call them what you want, as long as they're kind of clear for you and you can remember them down the track and you're not going like, what is this layer? And trying to find it in a slew of kind of bunch of different layers. I don't have too many here, but it can start to get a little bit out of control if you don't watch it. So what I like to do, my kind of standard way of doing shading is using an adjustment layer. So let's get straight into this. On my layer group here, my colors layer group, I'm going to go down to this panel here and go in and put an adjustment layer that it's going to be a hue saturation adjustment layer. And what that's going to do is it's going to allow me to kind of darken or change the colors of that whole image. I'm not going to mess around with that too much. I'm going to add in a little bit of kind of color to this, so it's not straight black. We'll talk about that in a sec. But yeah, let's kind of just darken this up. And you'll notice that as I've done that, it's putting that on my background as well, which I don't want. So I really need to click on this little kind of square with a down arrow. And what that does is it restrains the adjustment layer to the layer or layer group that's immediately underneath it. So anything outside of that group will not be impacted by this, which means my background stays the color that it stays, and that's all good. So let's get a little bit of kind of darkness happening in here. And I like, as I said, to put a little bit of color in here, just so that it's just kind of like a slightly warmer or cooler shadow. It's not just straight black. Black is never generally a thing you want to just do. If you're doing some shading, don't just kind of throw in some black on an opacity layer on top. With colors like yellow, for instance, on his skin, it's that kind of gold color. It's going to turn kind of like horrible brown, terrible color. And that's not a Photoshop thing. That's just, if you mix two paints, like a yellow and a black together out of paint tubes, you're going to get a really kind of like pigeon poo color as well. It's not great. Nobody wants that. So we'll just kind of slide that over to some slightly kind of altered colors just to get a little bit more kind of vibrance in that image and a little bit more tone. And what it does with this is it adds in a layer mask on that layer. So now my adjustment layer, which I can come back to all the time, if I double click on that, I can readjust if it's not dark enough or it's too dark or I need to change the colors. I can always come back to it. And now I can go onto my layer mask and essentially paint some shading. So how that's going to work is like this, right? I'm going to come in and just kind of draw in some highlights onto this, depending on where the light's coming from. Again, we'll talk about that in just a sec, but effectively what I'm doing is I'm kind of masking out areas that I want to be my kind of highlights here, right? And it's just a really kind of quick way of doing this. And if I decide, for instance, like I don't like where the light is coming from in this, I need to change it, I can just come back and paint that back in and I don't need to worry. So effectively what that layer mask is doing is it's kind of putting shading on whatever colors I do underneath that. And the beauty of doing it this way for me is if I go in, let me just put a little bit more highlight back into that hair, for instance, so you can kind of see how that works. We'll just do something like that. That'll do. If I decide like, actually, I don't like the color of the hair, I can go back on that layer and change the color of that, and the shading will apply to whatever colors happen onto that. So it's basically just kind of shading that's always going to be active, whatever I do on the layers underneath it. So I think it's a really kind of handy way of working with your shading, and it's a really quick and easy way to work with that as well. So that's generally what I do. I'll just put an adjustment layer onto my layer group and then work from that. Now, the next thing we need to do is obviously decide where is our light coming from, right? So that's going to be pretty important on something like this. And we want to kind of have something that's going to make sense, I guess. We need something that's going to make the volumes of this character stand out, because that's the main thing that shading is for. Like, yes, shading is there to give a sense of light, but also it gives a sense of volume, right? So if I just draw a circle like this, it could be a ring, it could be a plate, it could be anything. It doesn't really have much volume. But as soon as I determine there's light coming from over here, and that means that shading is going to happen underneath here, all of a sudden that gets volume. It gets a kind of a sense of 3D to it. It becomes a sphere. So that's something that's really kind of crucial for shading to do, and something that you need to think about whenever you're doing something like this, which is an odd volume. There's a few kind of different things happening here, and it can make my image a little bit unclear. So I need to think of something that's going to allow me to just kind of define the volume a little bit more and kind of showcase that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try out a few different things. First of all, I'm going to try out just like straight up lighting from underneath, really dramatic, really scary, see how that kind of looks. Then we might sort of try lighting from, like, if you can imagine the lighting is coming in from this angle, like in perspective that way, and it's kind of coming towards us from behind him. So that's probably going to give us a little bit of interesting lighting to happen. So we'll mess around with those two different light sources. So let's try first with this kind of massive like underlighting and see how that looks, right? And one of the things that I like to think about with lighting is, you know, where does lighting fall on a particular volume? If we're kind of playing around with different sort of volumes like this, where does the lighting kind of happen? And I like to think about it as if it was snow or like powder or whatever. And if you're sprinkling kind of snow from this direction, the biggest amount of snow is going to happen over here, and the least amount is going to happen back here. So that's where your light and dark is going to be. Same thing on this guy over here. We're going to have the most amount of snow piled up on top, and then there's going to be a little bit of darkness, and it's going to get gradually kind of darker on the sides and over here, right? And same thing over here. We're going to get a lot of snow on this angle, and maybe it kind of peters out over there. Maybe we get a rim over there, and then it kind of does this. So it's just again, kind of a quick way to understand how lighting works with this. So we're going to say that our kind of snow here, our light is coming from the bottom. And so it's going to attach to anything that it will kind of cling to on its way up. So that means that these pants are going to get a lot of kind of lighting on this lower part down here, right? And we're doing this very, very roughly at first to get a sense of, you know, is this going to work? How's it going to look when I do this? And do I like it? So I don't want to spend too much time getting bogged down in detail here. I'm just trying to get a quick sense of how this is going to work, and even if it's going to work, right? So again, using a really big brush, getting some really rough ideas of lighting happening, working with that, and then kind of seeing how that's kind of attaching to everything for me, if it's working. The face is going to be a really good indicator of that, that kind of light source and how that's all working. I don't mind that, actually. I kind of like how that looks. We're going to get a lot of lighting underneath the arm here. And this is what I mean, again, with this, you know, strong sense of volume happening in here, is immediately putting that kind of lighting on that arm. If I zoom out, that starts to kind of define the volume of the arm kind of sticking out of the body a little bit more. And so that's a really good thing to have in that. So I don't mind this. There's something kind of interesting happening here with this lighting. Again, really dramatic. Down lighting always kind of does that, has that impact, and kind of makes your drawing super, like, you know, this is not very static lighting at all. It's really, really dramatic. Something kind of scary or moody is happening here. And it can be a very effective way to kind of render an image in that sense. So there's, you know, a lot of kind of interesting things happening here. Let's try potentially kind of a different one. So I'm going to undo that. I'm going to fill all of this and try what we spoke about before, with that kind of lighting coming from like back over his shoulder and hitting him in that way. So let's start with over here. So we're going to get some light happening there, potentially clipping that. It's kind of doing the shoe over here. Again, like, you know, if you're kind of struggling with this, it's like, oh, how do you know where that lighting is happening? There's a little bit of kind of guesswork, but mostly, as I said, if you kind of apply this idea of this kind of snow analogy that I was talking about, I think that can be quite helpful in kind of understanding how the lighting is going to happen, where the volumes are coming from, and how it's all interacting with itself and kind of other things in the illustration itself. But again, you know, trial and error. Don't be afraid. Because I'm on a layer mask, I can just kind of try stuff, and if it works, it works, and if it doesn't, maybe I'll go in and kind of get some reference of kind of how that's supposed to look and how I'm supposed to draw that. So let's get the rest of the knee and pants in, and it's probably not going to be heaps of lighting on the rest there. And maybe these two kind of fingers. It's not super accurate. Like if the lighting is coming from where I said it was coming from, i.e. kind of like over his right hand shoulder, those fingers probably wouldn't catch any light because the head is blocking the light from getting there. But in the interest of kind of adding that volume clarity that I was talking about, putting that highlight on those fingers, if I undo that, you'll see what I mean, immediately kind of gives your eye a focal point to land on at that spot, creating a sense of like, oh, there's something sticking out at us that's catching the light. And it increases that volume for us a little bit. So again, that's just a nice way to kind of use lighting as more than just this vehicle for, you know, putting in shading and stuff. but also, and more predominantly, which is what, shading should be used for, is give an indication of where the volume is coming from, actually. Let's get the eyes. I'm going to cheat a little bit and block out the eyes, simply because the eyes are always going to be a focal point of any kind of drawing, and having those be kind of shaded is not necessarily a great idea. So just bringing in that sense of kind of, there's a bit of life in the eyes. So we're cheating a little bit here and adding some shading out of the eyes, or taking shading out of the eyes, if you will. So all I'm doing here again is just working on this layer mask and making sure that I'm happy with how everything is looking. Get some more detail. So this is now just kind of cleaning this up a little bit, because I did it super roughly. And so we're just looking at getting a little bit more kind of hair texture in, getting a little bit more of that detail looking accurate. Let's get this happening in here. Sorry, bumping my mic. All I'm doing, by the way, here is switching between white and black because I'm on a layer mask. So pressing X allows me to swap. If you look down my colors down here, you see they're swapping from black to white. Black is going to hide the shading that I've done, and white is going to show that. So again, just a really easy, simple way of just kind of keeping my finger on that X button and changing as I need to, wherever I need to kind of add in a little bit of light or shading. And get some texture in these kind of metal bits as well. If we do this, we can kind of make it look like there's scratches in these kind of metal bits, like they've seen some fighting. And how you do that is you dig out a kind of a groove in here, so that's catching light on that side, and then on the opposite end we swap colors, and then we do this kind of thing, and it just gives it this sense of like there's like a dent in there and it's catching the light and creating the sense of shading. Really nice way to get a little bit of kind of interest and a bit of texture in your drawing that way. Something else that I try and do lately, so this would be my kind of standard way of adding shading into something like this, but lately I've been trying to get into a little bit more kind of anime vibes, a little bit more kind of comic vibes, and seeing if I can actually just work full kind of black shading into this, and seeing kind of how that then plays overall. And it's something that I struggle with quite a bit, working with that and kind of getting the highlights in. Generally speaking, if I'm doing that, I probably wouldn't have this shading layer, because again, it might just be overkill, but adding a little bit of that kind of black in there and that kind of sense of shading, I think, it is quite effective if you're going for that comic book vibe. It's just, again, something I've been trying to do a little bit more, but I'm finding that my lack of experience in that shows quite a bit. And it's something that I'm definitely struggling with, but gotta learn, gotta start somewhere. And so I'm trying to kind of implement this kind of thing a little bit more to see, how that all looks. And it gives it a much more kind of like dramatic vibe in there. But again, as I said, Sorry, my screen is doing some funky things. Here we go. I probably wouldn't have that with the black there because it kind of gets lost. Or I could just go back onto my adjustment layer and kind of lighten that a little bit to get my black to kind of come through a little bit more, and that could be really cool. But yeah, I won't do that on this one today, simply because we're going to do something a little bit different actually. And what that is I'm going to show you guys how to do a quick kind of halftone shading. And what we're going to do is we're going to do this, and I'm not sure if I did this already actually in a previous stream, in a previous episode, but we're going to try it again on this one. And I'm going to actually take my selection here that I've created. So this is the layer mask that I've painted out, right? And actually, I don't even need to do that. I can just make a new layer, and I'm going to fill that with a kind of 50% gray. I'm going to turn this guy off, and I'm going to fill with a 50% gray. There we go. And that's not really what I wanted to do. What am I doing? Let's do that. And then we're going to go up into filter, pixelate, color halftone, and we're going to put that onto like a 6, maybe a 10 point. And then go 45 here, 45 here, 45 here. So they're all aligned on the same angle. And then let's see how that kind of looks in the end. And that creates a nice kind of halftone layer. As dot's a little bit big. So let's go back in, undo that. We'll go back into this pixelate, color halftone, and maybe give it like 6 instead and see how that looks. Yeah, that's better. And now all I need to do is pop this on a multiply and take this layer mask and just drop it onto that. And I get the same kind of information that's happened, but now I've got a halftone kind of shading that's very kind of anime vibes. So again, something, to think about if you're trying to get something looking a little bit more kind of graphic and stylized, then you can totally go for that kind of graphic device that is a halftone. But we're going to stick with this. We're going to leave it here. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to round this off with an extra light that can come in. And so what that is going to work as is this, right? We're going to put a new layer on top of that. And I'm going to cancel out this layer, and I'm going to call this neons. And what this is going to be basically is, if you want to think about it like this. So in our little kind of drawing that we did before, where I had, lighting coming from the top here, and so hitting this bit, and then shading all through kind of down here, that's kind of all nice and good. But what we want is to have this kind of rim light or bounce light happen on like just a smaller one down here, just to kind of show that this is, it's a full kind of circle. It's really kind of working in this volume idea. And so I'm going to pop that on there, and I'm going to choose a color that's going to contrast with the rest of my drawing. So generally speaking, I would tend to go with like a pink or something on this, just because it's like neon highlights. But if I do that here, I'm going to get a lot of kind of visual mud, because my image is it's quite red overall. And so coming in with this kind of, I'll do this very roughly to begin with, so you can kind of see how that works. Is the light, usually you want that to come from the opposite direction to the natural light. So this kind of extra light needs to come from a different direction. So where the shading is, I'm adding in this kind of like pink highlight to that, and then the natural light can be coming from the other side. That's the whole point, right? You want a counter light to your natural light source to kind of enhance this sense of like volume that we're seeing here. But again, if I'm just working with this color, I'm going to get some kind of weird effects when I zoom out of this. You'll see that it's not super clear. Whereas if I change the color of this to something that's not really in my image already, like this kind of bluish green, all of a sudden that really pops out of the image and really kind of showcases the different kind of highlights that I've had in there and increases again the volume that we've had. So, again, this just kind of muddies the image a little bit. It's nice. So, I love pink neon, as you can see behind me, I got one. But we need this image to be legible. We need this image to be clear. So this color is going to work a whole lot better because there's nothing really like it in my image. This predominance of like reds and oranges that are in my image is making it difficult for me to choose another kind of red warm color for that bounce light because it just kind of flattens the artwork a little bit. So working with this is going to be a whole lot better for me. And now I can kind of go in and do a little bit more kind of detail in here. And you'll notice that it's on a clipping mask as well. It's on a clipping layer so that it's not kind of painting over here where I'm kind of moving my cursor. Nothing's happening over there because it's clipped to my layer group underneath, right? So it's really just a matter of me making sure that I'm clean on these things and not kind of working too far out of those kind of lines, but I don't have to pay too much attention when I'm going outside the drawing. And again, now we can kind of catch the light on the hand sticking out and start to really get some interesting kind of volumes happening in here. You guys can't see this, but my cat is just there out of frame, watching all of this, diligently waiting for me to get up so she can take my cushion that I have just warmed with my butt for 20 minutes. Yep. All right. So again, really kind of something that I like to do quite a bit in these kinds of drawings, and just I think kind of adds a lot of dynamic volume and kind of lighting to all of this. Speed this up a little bit. All right, so there we have it. We've got our main light and we've got this kind of extra neon light. If I want to, I can put in a little bit of a glow on this, not a stroke, sorry, an outer glow, and go back into my color here. That's probably a little bit big, but just a little bit of a glow on that is going to make it kind of just that little extra kind of lighting happening. I generally don't love doing that just because I go for something a little bit more graphic and just kind of flat colors. But that is definitely something that you can think about doing when you're kind of working with this. So there we go. That's nice and kind of clean, something that works really, really well, I think. So now what we can do is we can kind of quote unquote finish this image, right? At the moment, it's just an illustration kind of standalone. It's cool. I like it, but it's not really kind of going anywhere. It's not really kind of used for anything. So what I can do now is I can start thinking about kind of adding, graphic elements. What could this be? And as I said at the start, I want to kind of make this into a desktop background. So very easily what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a screenshot of my background, my desktop at the moment, and I'm going to just bring this into here just to get the dimensions of that. And we've got something like this that's working pretty well. All right, bring that up here, rasterize this layer, and I'm going to lock it and fill it with it. So this is now my new kind of dimensions that I need to work from. And I'm going to grab all of my layers here, all of this, and I'm going to just rescale a little bit just to kind of center that in my image. There we go. And now I can go in on my mask and I can just clip it. And that's just it's just a quick and easy way to get at least the dimensions of that image correct for me. And now I'm at the right dimension. So it's probably a bit too big. It's like, if I was really being smart about this, I'd actually save that screenshot that I did on my desktop and move this artwork onto that file rather than taking the screenshot and moving it onto this artwork, because the dimensions are probably not going to be right and they're much too big, but that's all right. Photoshop always, when you're kind of working with rasters, always better to be too big than too small, just because you can always downscale, but you can't upscale. So now what we're going to look at, as I said, is adding in some kind of graphic elements. So we're thinking about kind of putting in some type. We're going to put in these ideas of like titles and things. So I've got all of this happening. Let's go in and grab all of that and rescale a little bit. So obviously I've done these prior to the stream and getting this sense of, a different version of Dragon Ball. I've gone in and looked at some kind of covers, some retro covers of Dragon Ball books and chapters to get this thing. So this little kind of these dots with the Japanese writing at the bottom of the title, that's taken straight from something that is very prevalent on a lot of Dragon Ball chapter covers. We've added in kind of a new typeface up here just to kind of make it this idea of, a little bit more kind of modern cyberpunk. We've added in Akira Toriyama's name in kanji up here. And then we're playing around with different ideas. So we've got this kind of cyberpunky frame because we're going for that kind of cyberpunk vibe. Let's drop out this color here and go with something a little bit kind of more in line with what we're doing. So maybe something like that, brighten it up a bit. Again, this is where I like to play around with a bunch of different things. This one's got a little bit more kind of anime vibes to it. Looks like a kind of anime framing. So we've got these focus lines, or we could do a little bit more kind of symbolic. So we've got that kind of the World King kind of kanji set that's on the back of Goku's uniform. So we can work with a bunch of different things here, and sky's the limit in terms of how you like to kind of put this in, what you like to do. I'm quite liking this one. I quite like how all that works. I like the callback to the vibe of that kind of anime look. But again, something to consider here is now my highlight here, my green highlight, which at the moment really, really pops because it's on a darker background. As soon as I go on to that yellow, it kind of loses some of that pop because the yellow and that kind of greenish blue are quite similar in terms of value. So that might be something that can be a little bit tricky. Maybe I need to think about kind of changing the tone here. orange works, but then orange, the pants are a little bit too orange. So now I lose that leg in the background. So there's always this kind of balance that you need to think about when you're working with this. I would go pink because pink, it's one of my favorite colors. But yeah. So Flynn, you're asking what reads on the back of Goku's back. It actually does say turtle in one. It's depends on the different stages that he's going through. When he's kind of young in the original Dragon Ball series, when he's being trained by Master Roshi, who's the Turtle King at the Turtle School, he's got a little kanji on the back that says Kami, which is turtle. But then as he gets trained by the Lord of Worlds, Kai, he's got the World King on his back because that's who he's being trained by, and so on and so forth. So it kind of goes by who is training him a little bit. So there's 4, I think, different icons that go on the back of his different uniforms, depending on where he's at that stage. But yeah. So again, like this is looking pretty good. I'm pretty happy with how that's all kind of working. And we could kind of keep making edits to this, keep looking at kind of adding to this and seeing where it all goes, taking away things, adding to it. Sky's the limit with how we can work with this. But yeah, this is pretty much done at this stage. So what I thought I would do, for those of you guys who have kind of stuck through this and kind of watched all the episodes, is I'm going to take this to its final form. And what I've actually done is, as a little kind of extra treat, I've actually made a kind of Super Saiyan version of the same illustration with all the kind of the power up and everything else. And that's going to mean, obviously, I'm going to need to kind of fix some colors and kind of think about how that's going to work. So that's probably going to work a little bit better with this one. But yeah, here we go. We've got this kind of very, powered up, well, almost a little bit too kind of powered up version of our illustration that we can kind of use. And I've gone with that down lighting. I've changed the lighting on that one. But all the kind of different effects here, all just kind of glows and inner glows that we've got. And so, yeah, you can't do a Goku illustration without going into the kind of the Super Saiyan version of himself. So that's basically it, right? This is the end of our 4-part series on digital drawing. So we've gone from kind of inspiration, sketching, inking, coloring, shading, and now kind of final touches to get something like this. So thanks for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Hope you guys got something out of it, learned a thing or two. Thanks for all the questions in chat as well. Always appreciate it. And until the next set of episodes, take care, and I'll see you then. See ya.